Get ready, it's time for the podcast.
Welcome back to the Candy Colored Studio. I'm artist Katrina Berg. This is episode 195, and I am so excited today because I have my dear friend Kathryn Sonntag with me, and we are going to be talking all about her latest book, which is called The Mother Tree: Discovering the Love and Wisdom of Our Divine Mother. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back on this wonderful podcast.
You guys, we were just having the best time catching up, and I'm like, I have to get focused here, or else poor Kathryn's going to be here with me all night. Okay, so for those of you that haven't heard Kathryn's previous episodes, we actually did an interview a couple years ago, and they are episodes 87 and 88, and you'll find them on my podcast page, katrinaberg.com. Go listen to them. You can also watch this episode on YouTube as well as in Spotify, and that previous episode has a YouTube version as well, so you can see Kathryn. Both of our hair has grown in the last 2 years. Is that so funny? Yeah. So we look a little bit different, but I promise it's still us. And yeah, so just to kind of give you a little background. So I got to know Kathryn through a dear artist friend who introduced me because she knew that Kathryn was doing poetry about Heavenly Mother. And you know how much I love learning and just finding new ways to connect with Heavenly Mother. And so that's how Kathryn and I met, and I started getting to know her and her work. And so that collection that you'll hear all about in episodes 87 and 88 is called The Mother. Oh, goodness. The Mother. No, we're doing The Mother Tree. It's the tree at the center. Yes,
Yeah, lots
Kathryn? I'm going to lose my brain.
Yeah.
Yes, no, it's good. It's good. We love trees. We love Heavenly Mother. I just am losing my brain. That's all. It's all good. So obviously, you know, if you would want to like really dive into more about Kathryn, I totally recommend that you listen to these episodes because she did such a great job talking about her as a landscape architect. She's also done a lot of work with environments and systems, and obviously she's a poet, and now she has her first book. So, and that's just a little peek into the amazingness of Kathryn. But I was hoping, Kathryn, that we could just start with you telling us just what you've been up to since our chat in May of 2020, because I know you've had lots of projects that I've seen on Instagram, and that's really, really amazing.
Yeah, it's been a crazy couple of years, I know, for everyone in a lot of ways, but I have sort of just kept talking about my collection and writing more poetry and just always having the discussion on different podcasts and different forums, doing Sunstone and other conferences. So it's been really great. It's really, that first collection was really sort of like a gateway into this larger conversation about women inside the LDS Church and outside, and how we include and exclude women's voices in the world, and how to sort of address the disparity and the struggles and difficulties. So I realized that my work so far around the divine feminine kind of came from two different angles. One was the poetic, writing a collection of poetry, and the other was academic. So I wrote a few papers, academic articles, to talk about my research. And I kept thinking, I really should do something that is more accessible, something that just about anyone can sort of sit down with and ponder and spend time with. And so I started doing an outline for a new book, which became The Mother Tree. And around that time, Bill Turnbull from Faith Matters Foundation reached out to me. I'd never met him before or talked with him. I knew of Faith Matters, obviously, they do fantastic work. But like cold called me and like asked me to write a book, which was insanely wonderful. And so I was already sort of writing this outline, and it was just like a perfect, it was just perfect timing as well. You know, I felt sort of, it was interesting when I finished the first book, I didn't know if I would feel like relief and this sense of like accomplishment. I kind of didn't. Like I finished it and I was like, okay, next, like what's the next thing? Like I felt this, I remember telling a few
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
that I felt this great urgency to keep going. And so it was really incredible to me that Bill sort of found out about my work, and there was something in it that he felt like was right for Faith Matters, and working with them has been fantastic. So anyway, so I finally finished it. It's published, and I finally think I have a sense of like accomplishment. I don't know, like it feels like a resting point, which has been really great because
Yeah.
it's been years, you know, in the making. So yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. A resting point. Speaking of resting points, Kathryn invited me to go to an event. We decided it's been about a week and a half, but there was a panel, and obviously Kathryn was on the panel and she was talking about this new book. And it was really sweet because Bill did go in and kind of like introduce, Kathryn in the book and his whole thing. And he was so cute. He had his little knapsack or whatever it was, and he said that he likes to go down to the river with his bag, and he just had a few treasured things in his bag. And one of them was Kathryn's book. And did he have both? Did he have the poetry collection too? Or was it just this?
We
I can't
had
remember.
a collection of Rilke poems. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it was great. It was great. It was really, really sweet. And yeah, I think that that's so amazing because there are times in our lives where, like you say, we should feel this sense of accomplishment. But if we're being honest with ourselves and if we're willing to do the hard thing, which obviously you could have just said no, I'm,
Oh,
I'm putting it on the shelf. I put all that effort into it.
I almost.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet you knew that you needed to keep going. You're like, yeah, I almost did that. And but that's the hard thing, is saying, okay, I should just keep going. I'm going to write this, the outline, and then things just came into play. And lo and behold, how would he know that you were already writing the book? Do you know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah.
getting ready to write the book. Isn't that
Yeah, it
beautiful?
is. It felt very.
Yeah. When I found out you were writing a book, I was like, oh,
Yeah, it just felt very similar to my experience writing the first book, in the sense that it was sort of the confirmation or sort of energy, like the push that I needed to sort of uh, like an acknowledgement, right? That what my heart desired was a good
yeah,
desire, and that it was necessary in the world. It's like to have like the universe, to have God like
yeah,
behind you,
yes,
like you're in the flow of your work and you're in the flow of what you know you're on earth to do. Like he brought that to the work, and I was like,
yeah,
okay, like this is really something that I
yeah,
need to do. And so from the get-go, I had this very deep sense, like this is, I'm doing this, I'm doing this work hand in hand with God. Like I'm doing this work for their purpose. And it was a extremely like
yes,
humbling and just profound experience.
yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so important too to acknowledge those touch points that we have with divinity, right? Like you had that moment where really wanted to put it on the shelf. You realized there was more. You were brave enough to say okay, and then you had that touch point with God say, "Okay, here is, we're going to give you this experience. We need you in this process." And then and then you did find that sense of accomplishment. So I think that that's amazing too, because I think you and I know that even though you finally felt that sense of accomplishment, that it's still not the end, right? Like there's still more work to be done from everything that you and I have talked about. This is just a beginning of the journey, but at the same time you received that loving touch point, like this, you well done. Well done. Have a rest. Regroup, and then we'll do something else. But I think that's so important, because I think as creatives, any type of creatives, any passion, especially when it's coming, when you feel that it is divinely inspired, you need to have those moments where, okay, this is good, this is good.
Of
Does that make
course, of
sense? I
course.
don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's amazing. Do you mind telling us, like, how different the two projects were with your research mechanics, like the process overall, the difference between, and obviously you said you're still writing poetry, so obviously those two worlds are kind of colliding.
Yeah. So the first collection, the first book, I had done years of research looking at biblical scholars, their books and papers and presentations, and really sort of accumulating a greater knowledge about sacred texts and the presence of the divine feminine, not just within the Bible, but in apocryphal texts and extra canonical texts, and really finding these threads that sort of, it wasn't just one scholarship. Margaret Barker was a huge influence, but there were other, many scholars who were and people who were more in like the archaeology field, or different approaches that were sort of discovering that in ancient Israel, there was this divine figure in the temple, that she was not a pagan goddess, that she was a mainstream Israelite goddess, and the connection to the Holy of Holies in the temple, all of that, which, I talked about in greater detail, I think, in our previous interviews. But so that work was sort of combining that new knowledge I had, the sort of new knowledge I had gained about intersectional feminism, like the understanding of sort of the ways in which women have been marginalized through patriarchy from essentially the beginning of time. My own experiences becoming a mother, and understanding a cosmic symbology within my own body that was represented as the tree of life, and then finally making some real connections between sacred experiences I had had in nature and the presence of the divine feminine in those experiences. So writing those poems was sort of a way for me to alchemize all of these different ways of knowing, like the intellectual, the emotional, the spiritual, the very physical. Um, and poetry is sort of my mother tongue, in the sense that I've written poetry since I could write. And so it just felt like the most intimate
Wow.
and natural and innate way for me to sort of create a language around the feminine that has been missing from our faith tradition, from the world at large. Like, to really begin to create myself, I had to create language, um, because myself, the creation of myself is also the discovery and creation of divinity, right? Like it's a cooperative process. So that book, like, I had intentions of publishing it. Like, I had written a few poems, and a friend really sort of encouraged me to take it to a specific press, to BCC Press. And it was, I think I was a third of the way through it when they accepted it. Like, they said, yeah, we'll publish this. And so that was the intention. Like, the intention was not necessarily to have it published. It was for me. But then when I started writing, I realized, like, this is something that, could be for an audience. Like, this is something that could, potentially help other people, or be a way to sort of discover that feminine quality or language, or ascension imagery, like a spiritual ascension path or image that could connect us more concretely to the divine feminine. So anyway, it was a very intimate, sort of internally driven project. And then this book, the second book, The Mother Tree, I wanted to take one of the sections from that book, the poetry collection, and flesh it out more. So the first section of that book is called The Tree of Ascent, and is really looking at the tree of life as an image of the soul, which we're familiar with in scripture with Lehi and Nephi's the tree of life, with the tree image from Alma, sort of this tree that represents the soul, or a tree that represents eternal life. That there's a connection within our faith to the tree as like the epitome of what we're seeking, the love of God, eternal life, but then also an internal journey. So journey, we feel the seed growing inside of ourselves, we become the tree, we access the tree's fruit. And so that was more of a, it was also deeply personal and profound and artistic, I would say, in a lot of ways, but it was also more, perhaps more pragmatic, a little bit more, maybe a little bit, just because I really
Yeah.
wanted to help
Yeah.
people journey through these realms of the tree, to start out in the root zone of the tree and discover what that was, go
Yeah.
to the trunk, and then go up to the branches, and really looking at the cosmic tree, which is the archetypal tree. Um, so the imagery and the symbolism and the meaning behind those different zones of the tree are sort of fundamental to a lot of cosmologies and mythologies since the beginning of time. So they're just, it's not my sort of creation, but it's a way in which peoples throughout space and time have been able to associate the realms or levels or planes of existence.
Yeah.
And so it was just a perfect
Mhm.
way to illustrate who the mother is by using the actual image of her body, of her beginning, middle, and end, for to sort of help people access a more feminine way of knowing and accessing deity.
Yeah, it's interesting because, obviously, since both you and I went to architecture school, we have husbands that studied architecture as well. I think it's interesting because when I first started realizing, when I when I realized where you were going with the book, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's totally like
Mm,
blueprints." You've got the plans of the roots, you've got the plans, all these different parts of the tree, and yet it's also so visually how do you say,
mm,
concrete. It's very visually concrete. It's really easy to understand. And I think you're right, because it does connect us with the visual side of things with the tree, but also with symbolism, and also understanding mother and all these different facets that, the divine feminine really encompasses, and then invites us to see, like you said, in ourselves, in those around us, to really be able to understand the love of God. I think we have to just reach deeper. And I loved that whole, just the whole imagery of just the way you presented it is really beautiful. And like you said, we see bits and pieces of these images throughout time, but this was such a good way to just put it all together. And as you can tell, it's not a huge book. You definitely want to take your time. Like I wanted to take just a really long time with each section, but at the same time, it's also so
mm.
accessible. Maybe that's, I don't know, that's how I felt.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah.
But yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. So I think, yeah, is there anything else that you want to say just about how the sections came together? I mean, obviously, It's different than the poems because the poems, like you said, you'd been working on them for a while along with your research. And I think they blended together really nicely. But I also think that it transitioned really naturally into this book. Everything that you had studied, things that you had taught me in our last interview, like new places for me to research. It just felt like a really smooth transition to this next book.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah. Yeah, I think just I could perhaps lay out a little more what the sections are and sort of the flow of the book. I think that would
Yeah.
be helpful. So, um,
Yeah. Let's do it.
so essentially, as the author, I'm sort of the guide through the book. So I'm taking the reader on a journey, and we're going through the different realms of the tree. And so we start off by sort of there's a diagram in the book that shows the cosmic tree, the whole root zones, which represent the underworld, and then the trunk, which represents the temporal sphere in which we live, mortality. There it is, yeah. And then the canopy of the tree.
I don't know how good you can see it, but
That maybe we could use this. The canopy is
oh
represent
yeah. Did
yeah
that one.
represents the celestial realm or the divine wisdom. So looking at the tree in this sense, we begin in the roots and we move up to the trunk and then we move up to the crown, but we're quick to sort of say that this isn't just a linear trajectory. This isn't just a linear progression. Like, this is a very cyclical
Yes.
process. So when we begin in the roots down in the
Yes.
bottom, we're looking at ancestral wisdom. We're looking at sort of a realm of introspection and really trying to suss out what about our own identity, the life that we're creating, our beliefs, what is really grounded in divine truth, and what is perhaps mixed up with tradition or cultural expectations or perhaps unhealthy or untrue perceptions of who we are. And a lot of that work, for the purposes of this book, centers around trying to truly understand what is divinely feminine and what is divinely masculine, and understanding that each individual, no matter how you identify in terms of gender, sex, has those components or aspects or energies inside of themselves. So everyone sort of is called on this journey to try to find that balance, to try to find out, what parts of themselves perhaps tend more towards the chaotic and chaos and darkness and shadow, what leans more toward production and um, order and sort of a linear framing of the world, and understanding that both are necessary and both sort of speak to a greater understanding of a divine mother and a divine father. So we start in that region, then we move up to the trunk, which is sort of the place where we find expression of this work and this root work and the shadow work that we've done. So we're able to sort of manifest a truer version of ourselves, a more awake perhaps version of ourselves in relationship. And from that, we gain a greater insight into what is divine. We access a wisdom that we couldn't otherwise. We have a greater vision of what is celestial and good and lasting in this life, as well as uh, what will sort of endure in the life to come. And so, we're looking at the mother as the tree of life because she is described as the tree of life in scripture. She's known as wisdom with a capital W. And so wisdom and the tree of life are used interchangeably in Proverbs, in the book of Enoch, in the book of Wisdom, which is an apocryphal text, and in various other places in the Old Testament, we see this common connection between the tree of life and wisdom. And wisdom and El Shaddai, or the lady in the temple of Jerusalem. So there's sort of this ancient framework that prophets like Nephi and Lehi would have been aware of. They would have been familiar with a mother goddess in the temple and her image as the menorah. And so this is a very sort of personal journey that the reader can go on, to go from one plane of existence to another, and as many times as necessary, right? We go back into the shadowland often. We come and then we sort of manifest differently in the world, and new knowledge is created. So it's this very cyclical process that helps us to just be more awake and alive and aware of what is real versus what is illusionary. And yeah, it's just sort of your own, and you can bring to it how much you're ready to bring to it, right? That's kind of the beauty of it, is it's like wherever you are in your personal journey with the divine feminine, your understanding, hopefully it feels like a safe and accessible way to approach each region based on where you are. There's not a certain, knowledge or understanding or even sense of comfort that you have to have with the topic. I think it's sort of the degree to which you feel open to learn, and desirous of the spirit in your journey, that's how much you will get out of the experience.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Well, should we dive in and talk about some of these? Like, for example, the roots section. Do you want to just jump right into the roots?
Yeah, let's do that. Would you like me to read a bit from that section?
Yeah, that would be great.
So this is sort of a brief description of perhaps what it's like to be down in the roots, and the kind of work that's asked of us to do in that space. I like to think of the realm of the roots as the holding space for introspection and reevaluation of our true identities. A comprehension of this repository of hard-won wisdom and sustenance is necessary for our growth. As such, it demands everything from us, our full presence of mind, body, spirit, and heart. The darkness we encounter here asks us in quiet and measured ways to sit with it, to allow its slow workings to speak to the hidden, ineffable parts of us. Many of us are afraid of the dark, but even more of us are afraid of being afraid. Mother God teaches us how to let our eyes adjust to the dim, and that the discomfort inherent in this common experience of the unknown encourages us to tend to our fears. So often, the darkness, the unknown, the unfamiliar, the unpleasant, the painful, is the very next place where God is preparing to build our trust. While fear exposes the limits of our present capacity, it also can be the perfect tool to reveal our potential capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting because when I first started reading this section, that was one of the first parts that I highlighted. I love that idea. And it's so important because I think you're right. I think a lot of times we think the darkness is bad, good versus evil, but it's necessary. And that there's nothing wrong with, like, I love it because again, you said we're afraid of the dark, but we're also more afraid of being afraid. And there's something amazing about fear. And I think that fear is also a beautiful thing because if we're not afraid, if we're not fearful, then we don't seek for the light. We don't seek for something better. We're not willing to see the parts that we need to fix. Like you talked about, the cyclical part of recognizing, okay, this is that part of me, whether it's cultural, whether it's ancestral, where it's just something that I've chose. It's something that I need to see. I need to see it clearly so that I can move through it and become more. And I just love how it's so necessary. We absolutely have to acknowledge it, accept it, embrace it, and then realize as we come to the mother tree and come to the divine feminine that if we want to be like her, then this is the only way to really become like her, right? We have to use the atonement of our savior, and then we have to say, this is where I want to be, and I know that you're the only way that I can get there, right? Which I think is so beautiful. But I think, again, if we're not willing to be okay with, like it said in here, right here, you said the unknown, the unfamiliar, the unpleasant, and the painful, those are just invaluable, right? We could either just get stuck in the cycle and be stuck in that discomfort. There's so many days that, I don't know, I think you're so much more developed than I am, Catherine, but I get frustrated with myself. Oh no, I did it again. Like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be frustrated in that moment, but I just have to be okay with that unpleasantness and that darkness. Otherwise, I can't move forward, right? It's a gift. It's totally a
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
I think that we forget that. I mean, if you look just at the sort of botanical nature of the tree, the root zone is where I mean, it's under the ground, it's in the soil, and the soil is created from dying, it's created from death and decay, and that's nutrients for all the new growth and all the new life. And there's this incredible network of fungi
Yeah.
that connect tree to tree, species to species, and it's communication. It's this incredible network of chemical signals,
Yeah.
brain-like functions in these roots. It's just incredible. And so there's a way in which, like, the shadow is just the other side of the coin, right? Like, light and shadow are inseparably connected, and they have to be, because one makes the other possible. There's no light without shadow.
Yeah.
So we have to really embrace this
Totally.
idea, and this is an archetypal, you know, meaning and understanding and experience of the feminine, that there is, like, if you think of yin yang, if you think of these sort of cosmic principles that we find in the oldest traditions and cultures on earth, like, there's this sort of understanding that to create order, you have to start with chaos. Like, there is a sense, even in our own creation story, right? Like,
Yes.
it's not like things were created out of nothing, but there was this realm of creative potential, this chaos that is not inherently negative. It's not, there's no negative connotation associated with chaos, except perhaps in our Western tradition, right? That the feminine is this sort of
Yeah.
chaos. And because we have become a sort of hyper masculinized society, even women tend to fear this chaos inside themselves, because we need certainty, we need order, we need a direction, we need to see what's coming. And
Yeah.
so when we're asked to stop and, like, address the unfinished parts of ourselves and really look at um, the really painful, difficult reality of, like, intergenerational abuse or intergenerational trauma,
Yes.
or
Yes.
the ways in which we have felt silenced as women because of patriarchy, or the ways in which
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
just have not been able to sit in the pain to find its cure. This is what the mother is calling us to do. Like, that's the way we see her, is to
Yeah.
clear out the clutter and to say, I'm willing to go into these depths just as Christ did and recreate myself, because
Mhm.
that's essentially what
Mhm.
Christ did. Like, he took every painful moment, he
Mhm.
took every unfulfilled dream, he took every illness, he took every woman who's miscarried. He took every moment and held it in his own body and became something new because of it. Like that's, in my opinion, that's what gave him the power to be resurrected.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, all the nutrients are there in the decaying soil, in the fungi network, in those moments, like you say, that Christ collected, that he was willing to bear those. He was willing to bear that burden. And like you say, look at what he was able to do with all of that. And so when we look at that, then we say, well, what can I do with all of this chaos? How can I become so much more? And I'm sure that we both can say, because I know you struggled a lot with pregnancy. I struggled with pregnancy, a little bit of like, depression afterwards, miscarriages, all those things. Like you say, it helps us not only to make more with that chaos, but then we can be that fungi, that network talking to all the roots, right? You can support the women around you that are going through the same thing because you understand. And that's why Christ is the ultimate root system of all that decaying and making, beauty from ashes, because he understands everything. And so we get just a tiny piece of what that's like, and that's where I believe where the true beauty comes from. If we're willing to then say, thank you for this gift, thank you for making this from this chaos, and now I can become more and I can relieve your burden in the process. And it also, I believe that that's where we magnify, and we also, gosh, there was a section that you talk about mother and how we're radiating her goodness, the radiation. I can't remember, it's
Yeah.
towards the end, but you're talking about how we can radiate the divine feminine. And the only way to do that is, I believe, to accept Christ's atonement, to take that chaos that became this beautiful gift to us, and then realize our potential and then radiate and say, this is our potential. We can become like mother or like
Mm.
father through this process, and that's such a beautiful thing. I also loved, I keep going back to the fungi. I really like mushrooms, not in the way that you're probably thinking, but anyways, I love the section where you talked about healing together, and that it was all about ancestors. And I was thinking about that with this amazing fungi network and how they can all talk to each other and explain, we saw this disease in the past, we saw this challenge, and this is how we overcame it, and you can overcome it too. Or we didn't quite get everything, we were able to accomplish about 80%. Can you finish? And we will help you, we will support you through that. And I loved that little portion as well. And you were specifically talking about the patriarchy that you've mentioned already, but I thought, in every aspect of our lives, those ancestors are there to support us, and in hope, and hopefully we can also fix the things of the past, which you also mentioned will heal everyone from the past as well. And my sister always talks about that. We're the change. We're not going to continue the broken traditions. We're not going to continue that. We're going to say thank you for what you've done, but we're going to stop that and we're going to do something different. But I think it takes, all the aspects, all both sides of the veil. It takes our savior, it takes our divine parents, both of them, in order to accomplish all these together as a family, to be this whole system of the roots and the tree and the environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh, well, that's a good section. I love that section. Let's go to the section that you wanted to talk about, with your personal experience in the canyon. Let's talk about that one, because that's a really good one too.
So in the second section, the trunk section, I talk a lot about the the really vital importance of being connected to the natural world. And there's the obvious, connection of the tree. The tree is this very real marker in our minds and in our understanding of the world of a natural system, or something, that just a symbol that we immediately identify as, oh yes, like this is a symbol of nature, this is a symbol of like the wild. And I've had a lot of moments, I guess, in my life where that experience of being in nature alone, so in solitude, has really shaped my sense of identity and my sense that I am known and I'm seen and I'm loved, and in a really profound way. And so this section is sort of highlighting one of those moments that I had when I was a teenager. And so I'll just read that and then I can talk about it more after. I remember when I was 17, leaving the house after an argument with my parents. I walked out the front door into the spring drizzle, full of anger and pain, toward the mountains east of Salt Lake City. The air was crisp. Low clouds filled the sky as dusk came on. I walked 3 miles alone up into the foothills until I reached the canyon. I hiked to an upper trail hidden by the understory and lay down in the dirt as the dark settled around me. The earth hummed under my humming body and held me. I let go of my pain and gave it to the mountain. I felt my breathing slow, my gaze soften. The stillness of the night enveloped me. I sensed a deep listening from the spirits of shrub oak and big-tooth maple, a recognition of my presence. I felt your existence is enough. You belong to me and I to you. Whatever happens will be. The rains will come or not. What is, is. I am that I am. I am the existing one. You are that you are. You are the existing one. The ritual of going out into the natural world in solitude is a vital way to experience deep presence. Our breathing changes, our attention is restored. We feel rejuvenated, soothed in the rhythms of waves, wind, and bird song. We encounter the mysterious offerings of attentiveness to creation, epiphany, revelation, transcendence that have no substitute. By doing so, we commune in ways that allow for the exploration of our internal landscapes, which has the potential to transform our ways of engaging with each other. So, this connection to the natural world has been really powerful for me since I was very young. I've always just had sort of an innate sense that if I took my pain or my problems to the mountains, they wouldn't necessarily be solved, but they would be soothed, and that there's a way in which I feel seen and heard that is very unique. It's different. I mean, I've had that experience many times in prayer as well, like a traditional LDS prayer. Um, but it's just a very different experience. It's a way to feel connected to creation that um, there's no substitute for it, because we kind of, we're in this culture where nature has become sort of a construct, and the way that we talk about it largely is that it's us and it's nature and we're separate from it. But when you're actually out there and you're listening and you're wanting to hear and you're wanting to sort of be in presence, that separation immediately falls away, and there's a sort of deep comfort and beauty um, in that understanding. And we know from social scientists, since the 70s, really, that there are so many health benefits from being in nature, emotional, cognitive, even just the ability for the mind to restore its ability to engage attention. So, as like a landscape architect, I read a lot of studies about, like this ability for the natural world to restore that um, sort of the attention. So there's two different kinds of attention. There's passive and there's active. The passive is sort of when things grab your attention, you don't have to think about it, right? Like something really beautiful, art or nature, and
Yeah.
that process of having your attention sort of taken by these beautiful things restores the more direct, um, active attention, which is sort of the attention you need to write on a computer or do programming or any sort of like desk job, right? The work that you have to do to sort of move yourself forward, propel yourself forward intellectually. Um, being in nature restores that. And so there's this really healing, sort of almost maternal way in which nature cares for you. Um, and I've just, and I know I said this in the last podcast episodes, but it became more than that for me. It became feeling my own soul in the land, like the femininity that realm of femininity that I discovered in pregnancy connected me, like rooted me to the spirit I feel in the body of the world itself. And so it became like a very visceral sort of moments that I realized that what's being done to the land is also what's being done to women, like that there's this direct link between the earth's lack of sovereignty and women's lack of sovereignty, the way that patriarchy subdues and subordinates both women and land because they are very much connected.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was just sort of an example that, and the sort of words that I use, it's really fascinating because as I had this experience as a teenager, I didn't have words come to me, right? As I'm experiencing this, it was like years later that
Yeah.
I'm realizing what I was
Yeah.
feeling and
Yeah.
able to find some words to kind of
Yes.
capture it. And that in itself was such a gift
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
um, it was such a powerful moment and something that just transcended language. But to be able to at least find some
Yeah.
words that sort of could encapsulate it was really beautiful. And I wouldn't
Mhm.
have had those words
Mhm.
without this journey I've been on, like finding a divinely
Right.
feminine language. And so anyway, it's just
Yeah.
um,
Well, that's beautiful. I also think it's interesting because if you go back to the cyclical idea, many times we do revisit similar moments, but we take that moment deeper, right? So when you experienced it, it was this transcendent moment full of feeling. And I've had something similar happen before where I just had feelings. I can't really describe it. I just had these feelings. And then later, like you said, as I revisited that and I went deeper because I needed to go deeper into whatever it was that I was experiencing, that's when the words came. And I think that's so fascinating as well, because for me, sometimes it takes um, almost the sharing of the experience. The words don't come until I try to share the experience. And then finally, the words come. And I'm like, oh, that's what that but it's so familiar. The words come, you're like, that's what you were saying to me, but all I was hearing was the feelings. I felt it, I understood it, but now it can express it because now I understand the words. And like you said, you wouldn't have understood it until you understood the language, until you had researched and really spent time understanding the language of our divine feminine, which is so beautiful. What a gift. What a gift that is. And I'm just, yeah, I love I think that's the special thing about, just being a creative, being an introvert, being, somebody that's willing to just take the time to just keep inspecting those moments, because they will continue to give, just like as we plant those seeds, they will continue to develop and grow if we're willing to go back and nurture them. And they can be horrible moments that turn into something beautiful. It can be just a horrible moment that we learn from, but yet it's something that continues to give if we're willing to just consider the tree, consider the cycles, whether it's seasons of our life or just moments of just, going deeper. And I felt that throughout the whole book, Kathryn. I thought that that was really, really prevalent, and I appreciated that so much. Let's talk a little bit. You had a very tiny section on creativity and godliness that I just thought, I'm like, oh, this is for the creatives, for the artists. This is the thing. I believe that being creative is being is it's just, we were meant to create. We as women were meant to create. We as men were meant to create. It's part of being, having the potential to become a god. It's all together. And again, this was just a small section, but I thought that you really explained it very well, especially, the whole idea of, I feel like creatives in general talk to me a lot about just what is my voice and what is my purpose. Your voice doesn't have to be your style in art, or the way that you create poetry, or the way that you do events, or if you're a wedding planner or whatever. There's so much more to it, and I feel like you really touched on that, how it really is in every aspect of our lives. Let's see. But yeah, if you want to share anything about that. Of course, that goes back to the whole radiating part too, huh?
Yeah,
That was the radiating section too, I think.
yeah.
Let's see.
The David O. McKay quote, is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, we could read that, and then maybe you could just share your thoughts on that whole section, because obviously you create. I describe you as very good at what did I say, cross training, but I think it's because you're multi passionate. And I think when it comes down to it, most of us are probably multi passionate. Most of us don't just focus our efforts on one thing. We may not think we're good at anything, but in actuality, most of us find that we are drawn to two or three things that really just, make us come alive inside. And anyways, if you want to share anything about that, because I think, Kathryn, you've tapped into that. But I think it's hard for people to realize that they can tap into it as well. You're such a good example of that. So anything you
Oh,
want to share on that idea?
sure. Yeah, I will. I'll read the quote and then just this last paragraph, and then we can talk more about that. So, and just to set up the quote, I'll read the little paragraph before. The healing we experience in our cyclical dives into the chambers of our underworld changes us on a cellular level and improves the quality of energy we embody, tuning us to a higher frequency. We experience a greater awareness of what we energetically contain and release into the world. We take greater responsibility for what we radiate. As David O. McKay taught, every man, every person radiates what he or she is. Every person is a recipient of radiation. The Savior was conscious of this fact. Whenever he came into the presence of an individual, he sensed that radiation. Whether it was the woman of Samaria with her past life, whether it was the woman who was to be stoned, or the men who were to stone her, whether it was the statesman Nicodemus or one of the lepers. Christ was ever conscious of the radiation from the individual, and to a degree, so are you, and so am I. It is what we are and what we radiate that affects the people around us.
Mhm, mhm.
In a symbolic way, when we create, we participate in states of mind, body, and spirit akin to the gods who created Earth. In very real ways, we participate in the recreation of the universe through our individual transformations of intelligence, faith, and presence in the world. Our personal transformations lead ultimately to a shift in collective consciousness, bringing us all closer to holiness and wholeness. I believe this is all in preparation for her. Our collective movement towards Zion will open the way for her return. So, in between sort of that introduction and concluding paragraph, I just explained my experience of creating the Tree of the Center, the poetry collection, and how much I felt like that was a way to sort of combine, like I said before, all these different ways of knowing and to see something emerge that I could never have predicted. Like there's this emergent quality when we create that we bring elements together, but there's also unknown elements and unspoken elements, unconscious elements that come into our work, divine elements. And so essentially, when we're really open and drawing on these other ways of knowing, what we create is beyond our capacity, really. Like it is something divine. And I really felt that with both of these books. Like I had the chance to read through the manuscript right before it went to the printer, and I really was desiring to have a sense that what I had written was acceptable to God, because I really did feel the weight of responsibility to have it be something that um, in some way came close to revealing something that could be true for people. And I had a really powerful moment where I just felt warmth and light through my whole body, and I knew I had done what I had been asked to do. Um, but I also knew as I read that the book is smarter than I am. If that makes sense. Like what I created is more than I am.
Yeah.
Like I was astonished to a certain degree at the words I was reading. Um, and that's an incredibly
Yeah.
there's no words to
Yeah.
describe. Like humbling sounds trite. Like I don't know how to. It's just a totally unexpected and surreal experience.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really, really special. And I feel like I felt that as I read this. Everything seemed just very easy to understand, but then I would get to the end of a section and I would see like 50 footnotes and I'd be like, oh, I have to see where this came from, And so that's what's so beautiful is that you've taken years and years of research and not somehow, but divinely you were guided to know what to share, how to share it, what would best be understood, and also just lead us to more understanding. I can't remember which article it was, but there was one part you talked about the temple, and I found the footnote and read the article, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen that before. I'm so glad that that was in there. And so that's what's so beautiful is that even though the book is really not very big, it will lead you to about 10 or 20 volumes of research, some things that you may have seen before or sound familiar, and others that will be completely new and beautiful. And again, will invite you to continue to take this cyclical, beautiful journey towards our Heavenly Mother and our potential. And I think that's so beautiful. Well, I think the perfect way to end kind of the sections that you and I talked about is to talk about the ascension. the crown, the culminating portion. So I'll let you share that.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the notes. I think there's like 50 plus notes in each chapter. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot. It represents a lot of work. Um, yeah, so the crown section is really sort of this beautiful, and it's really an introduction, right? Because this is the realm that is the most elusive, perhaps, where we sort of have to
Yeah.
have done some of this work, and based on where we are sort of on our personal path is the degree to which this realm is revealed. And a lot of it has to do with our faith, which I translate as sort of this imaginal realm. And the tree of life itself is also a image or a symbol of like the imaginal realm, in the sense that you have like
Yeah.
the way that a tree grows and reseeds itself is like the imaginative realm, like the one idea leads to another, and it's very regenerative. And when I say imaginal, I don't mean sort of like pretend. I mean our ability to really use our experiential knowledge and our intellectual knowledge and our sensorial, like our sensory knowledge, and from there access this very real plane of wisdom and an understanding that sort of the ways in which we engage in the world now really inform our ability to have a vision of what is real and sacred here and now and eternally. And so I talk a bit in this section about the tree of life also being a symbol of the axis mundi, which is um, just the center of the world. It's a cosmic point of orientation, and for the LDS understanding, that would be like a temple space. So that would be like a point of spiritual orientation from which we orient ourselves. And in ancient cultures, it was also very physical. It was like a point of orientation in a physical plane, like a temporal plane, but also a cosmic plane. So the tree is also that, like a tree, a temple, a ziggurat, a pole. These are all sort of iterations of the axis mundi, or the world axis. And so I talk more about what that means in terms of accessing this point of the central point, the point from which all life begins and to which we return. And and then at the end of the chapter, we really look at the cyclical feminine way of growth, and begin to sort of pair it with a more masculine, linear approach to progression. And so and this is also a symbol. I know since writing this book, I've heard of other people describing, and sort of maybe in different terms, but the idea of like a spiral and a rod is also archetypal in some senses, and I can talk about that later. But I'll just read a little bit about um, the Ascension Path, like how the feminine understanding can help like really flesh out what this path is for everyone. That it's not just sort of outward manifestations of progression through ordinances and covenants, but there's also this internal cyclical work that we do. Like the structure of a tree's canopy, in Mother God's pattern of spiritual growth is repetition with variety. We are repeatedly asked to break our hearts open so that they may grow and accept more and more love. Though each specific way we come to that breaking point changes over the course of our lives. Feminine wisdom interweaves the necessity for cyclical ascents and descents into the realm of the roots with the more masculine movement of linear progression. United, they create an upward spiral of transformation. If we picture in our minds a tree in profile, we can see the repetition of the tree's layered branches, mimicking the shape of an upward spiral, while the trunk forms a straight vertical line. We see another iteration of the united feminine and masculine aspects in the rod and serpent motif. The feminine is symbolized as the undulating, sensual form of the snake wrapped around the straight line of the rod, the masculine aspect. This is an image of health, wholeness, and power to this day.
Oh, so good. I'm glad that you brought up, yeah, just the cyclical versus the straight line. It's interesting how, it's true. I think that too long, this is one of those experiences where you didn't realize you were, I just think culturally, I was always trying to go in a straight line, always go in that linear, because I think that's culturally what we were taught. But there was a point, and I'm not really sure when it was, and I'll have to do some work to kind of figure out when it started. But when I started realizing that it is okay to not be constantly in this perfect progression of a straight line, and to do this up and down, and like you said, doing the deep work, doing the work that yes, the straight line is good with the covenants and the things that we're doing that are so straight, but then it's also important to do the other stuff that goes back to the chaos. It goes back to the chaos, and I think that that's, like you said, that might just be more of the feminine portion that we have to come to understand and accept. And yet, like you said, it is a journey that we have to take together, and we have to recognize and embrace both the masculine and feminine, right? As in order to be whole and to become like our heavenly parents. And I think that's so powerful with the whole ascension understanding as well.
Yeah, and I think just going back to sort
Yeah.
of, and it probably would have been good to start out with this, but I'm just thinking about, like, I think there is, and in the section that I talk about patriarchy, I sort of go into this, but there is, I believe, culturally this idea, because we sort of swim in a world where the masculine is prized over the feminine. There is this idea that the patriarchal or masculine framing of the world is sort of the only way, and that it creates order, and that there is a hierarchy there, like, where you are in that space, in that sphere, in that way of being in the world. Part of the danger, there's lots of dangerous things about that, but part of the danger is not only that people don't do that introspective work, and that um, whole peoples are marginalized because they don't fit within a certain specific definition of what a few people in power deem as worthy. You also have the very false
Yeah.
notion that the masculine encompasses the feminine. So, for example, Heavenly Father, Jesus, what more could Heavenly Mother offer? She's gonna just salute whatever they have to say,
Right.
be that she would just verbatim say what they have to say. Um, there's no need, essentially, to have her voice in the world, because it would just be reiterating what Jesus and the Father are saying. And
Right.
that is a purely patriarchal notion,
Yeah.
because women are seen as appendages of men in patriarchy. We're not seen as autonomous, whole, unique individuals. We're seen as sort of helpmeets, in the sense that we fulfill the function of carrying on the work of the patriarchy. So I think part of this
Yeah.
introspective work is to really think about the women in our lives, or ourselves as women, or the feminine aspect of yourself, and really
Yeah.
try to understand and sense that part of ourselves is vastly unknown, even among women,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it has not become the stuff of
Totally.
scripture, of myth, of most art, of most cosmologies. Like, everything has been from the beginning largely male centric. And so the work of the hearth, the work of the home, the work of harvesting, of gathering, women know it. Women did know it, um, but it never
Yeah.
became
Yeah.
it never became the fiber of a culture. At least not one that has really,
Yeah.
we'll say, outlasted time. I mean, I'm speaking broadly. Of course, there are people's cultures still on the earth where I think the feminine is honored much more than it is in a sort of very modernized um, setting. So there's differences, like, there are peoples who do honor the feminine, and usually they also honor the land. Like, usually those things are very linked. So you see, like,
Yeah.
Amazonian peoples, you
Yeah.
see indigenous cultures. There's a lot of that still resonates, that has carried through, that hasn't been um, too sort of deconstructed. But you know largely speaking, those who have power in the world do not honor the feminine. And part of our work
Yeah.
is to look inside of ourselves and say, um, is my feminine self mute? Is it silenced? Is it wounded? And
Yeah.
how can I learn to have a voice that isn't a product of society? And it's such a hard process because it's the water we swim in, right? Like, it's so hard to wake up from that, because you really do think, like, this is my identity as a woman. Like, it really takes a
Yeah.
moment of
Yeah.
having to like Job, right? Like, really suss out, what about the way that I relate to the world and the way that I see myself is authentic and divine, and what of it is sort of
Mhm.
the messaging that I've received my whole life, maybe from a mother or a father or a husband, or it's just sort of, we know how much gender and gender roles are sort of hammered into us from a very young age. So there's a lot of undoing to be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think also, like you said, if we really want to understand how to become as women, we almost have to look at some of these experiences, not just our own, but of others, and look deeper. Like, for example, one that's really helped me a lot is the Mary and Martha story in the scriptures, where Christ is, inviting Martha to come and partake, and Martha is just trying to figure out, what is my part? Who am I? What am I as, like, I want to know these things that Christ is teaching. I want to know these truths, but I have all these roles to play. And is that good? Or should I be lazy like my sister and sit there and learn the truth and learn these divine principles, and just understanding, again, the guilt, the shame, the culture, and to realize that small moment that we learned about in the scriptures is, it's probably a moment that most of us as women experience and re-experience every day in a very small way. Like, I know I do it every day, and I'm not saying I'm like all women, but I think that's something that a lot of us share. And I think about that, and here are just two women trying to develop and trying to become like our divine feminine, learning through Christ, right? And again, one day I hope that they'll give us a little bit more understanding of what was going on in that moment and what they took from that. And then I think about, okay, as you're talking about how, we just think that the most important thing is to be powerful like a man, and to have all this power and wealth and organization and order. And I think, well, who's a woman that I know? Who's the most prevalent woman voice that I know in the world right now? I'm just curious, Kathryn, who do you think of? Who's like probably the most well known woman right now in our time that's alive? supposedly.
I mean, Oprah comes to mind, like, you know?
Oprah. Yeah, if we were just to talk about the US, I think Oprah is like a perfect example of probably, and then I would probably say Hillary gets a second there. We talk a lot about Hillary. We know a lot about Hillary. The other person I thought about was the Queen of England. She's got this Jubilee coming up. Everyone's getting ready to celebrate. And Oprah, I think, is great because she really has done a lot of work and tried to help women, and like she is kind of like this humanitarian example. And the queen, traditionally we look at the crown as being humanitarian, but honestly, Catherine, I don't want this to sound judgmental. When I think about the queen mother, I think about power, I think about order, I think about the crown. I don't think about her graciousness and loving kindness and the work she's done to become this type of woman that I want to be like. I don't really want to be like her. And queen mother, please don't take this the wrong way, but I don't want to be like that. Do you know what I'm saying? But that is the masculine, she is the perfect masculine representation of a woman, right? She has to lead, and she has to be in charge, and she has to do all these things that are expected of her. And I just think, oh, you take that and you take how organized and contrived it is, and you take that image in your mind, that perfect outfit, the crown jewels, all those things when you see her, and then you contrast it to this image. And to me, it's like I feel peace, I feel wholeness, I feel authentic, I feel love, I feel potential. And that's what the divine feminine represents. That's our potential. That's this, to me, this is what I want, right? But if we just listen to the world and we listen to that patriarchy or the male voice that's kind of prevailed in our culture, then we think that the queen mother is it. But I don't know how happy she is. Do you know what I'm saying? I know I wouldn't be happy if I had to do her role. And it's, anyways, totally off topic. But I mean, I just think it's really, really interesting how, like you say, that one of the biggest problems I think with patriarchy is that we forget our potential. Because mother is hidden, because it means that our potential's hidden, and the authentic and true, our true self is hidden.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really love that example because it's very concrete. I feel like sometimes talking about patriarchy can be a bit abstract. So I really appreciate that example. I wanted to, I don't know how much time we have left, but I thought I could share just a little bit about, let me find it here, about patriarchy, if that's okay. I just want to make sure that,
Yeah, I would love
yeah,
that.
I just want to make sure that we're operating under the same definition, because I know it can be a bit of a, there's a tendency to think that we're talking directly about men when we talk about patriarchy, and that there's sort of a way in which
Yes.
men are, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of put down, or yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, just give a definition if that's okay, and then talk a little bit about
Sure.
how patriarchy negatively affects men and women and everyone, like literally everyone.
Yes.
um,
Yes. Yes, exactly.
yeah. Okay, let's see. Here it is. As the basic system.
Like maybe back to the original wound.
Yeah, yeah, I'm going to start there.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
As the basic
Okay.
As the basic system of society or government in which men hold power and women are excluded from that power, patriarchy is the model of organization wherein males and all things associated with masculinity are valued over things associated with women and femininity. Patriarchy teaches that men are more valuable than women, that productive work is more important than reproductive work, and that caregiving and nurturing are women's work and therefore less valuable. The toxic power structure of a culture that sees primarily through a masculine lens creates suspicions and fear of what would challenge it, namely, what the rational mind cannot perceive, touch, or analyze. Hyperrationality minimizes the importance of other ways of knowing and creating meaning. It often discounts the necessary place of the ineffable in knowledge creation, the power of the unknown and unknowable, the spaces in between. The masculine striving toward achievement, production, and control becomes valued above the feminine qualities of relatedness. Relatedness to other humans, to the non humans who share the planet with us, to nature and the rhythms of nature, as well as to the rhythms of the physical body and the stages and passages of our lives. We are all at different places in our understanding of the painful realities of patriarchy. Patriarchal ideology is so pervasive that many believe that following its ideals is the only way to manage societies and organizations. It is called benevolent patriarchy because at first glance it appears to be a natural effect of life, one that is for everyone's good. And then I'm just going to skip over. Part of the delusion of the patriarchal world is the belief that the masculine encompasses all of the feminine, that what it defines as feminine is merely an extension of the male world. In extreme cases of patriarchy's influence, men have largely forgotten the feminine energy inside them and that a separate female realm exists. And then this last little portion. Sorry, I didn't have this one marked. So
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. This whole section is so good, you guys. You've got to just take the time. In fact, there's a really special little section where Kathryn shares an experience when she was a missionary in Italy, and that's really cool too. Did I talk long enough for you to find it?
let's see. I am close. Yes, I got it.
You,
Okay.
okay, she's got it.
Patriarchy doesn't only disenfranchise women, it subjugates anyone who does not fit the narrow definition of worthy by the few upholding power. Patriarchal masculinity estranges boys and men from their selfhood as much as patriarchal femininity estranges girls and women from their selfhood, just in different ways. It demands that men hold power above rather than with, keeping them from loving with all of themselves. Through the media, patriarchy tells us on a daily basis that men in power are able to do whatever they desire and that freedom is what makes them men. Patriarchal masculinity requires boys and men to uphold ideals of manhood that get in the way of loving justice between a woman and a man. The solution to this imbalance, as we know, is the perfectly just love of Jesus the Christ. As Bell Hooks, cultural critic and feminist theorist, put it so poignantly in her book All About Love, loving justice for themselves and others enables men to break the chokehold of patriarchal masculinity. So I just really love that description that men, both men and women, and however you identify, that there's a way in which patriarchy really keeps us from that authentic self, because it is an imbalance. It's a hyper focus on masculinity that makes masculinity like toxic because it can't exist in a vacuum, and it's trying to be the only reality. which is creating a delusional state in which we're living. And so bringing back the feminine into our psyches, into our hearts, into the world, I really believe is what's going to create balance and healing and allow for Zion to really actually begin to form on earth, because in my opinion, we've definitely moved quite a ways away from the Zion that Joseph wanted to establish, that we just haven't, we've missed the mark.
Yep. I completely agree. I keep saying, especially because we've been studying the Old Testament this year. And I said to my class, I teach the 15 to 18-year-olds. And we always get to the part, where Moses and the Israelites are wandering in the desert. And I said to them, did you realize they were like 12 miles away from the promised land at one point? I'm like, that's like us to Park City. Could you guys walk to Park City? They're like, yeah, we could walk to Park City. I'm like, why wouldn't you? I don't know. Why didn't they go? Why didn't they go to the promised land? I'm like, for whatever reason, they had to wander for 40 years. They're like, that's so crazy. I'm like, aren't we wandering? We're wandering. We're not going to Park City. We're wandering. Think about it. How are we wandering right now? And I think that really, like you said, understanding that beautiful balance within us, understanding and embracing the feminine nature so that we can become like our Heavenly Mother, but also the masculine for us women. And the same thing for the men. There is a portion of feminine that if they don't tap into that and enjoy that, they too won't understand what true wholeness is that the Father understands. One quick example, when I don't think I've told you this, Kathryn, maybe I have, but we had all our babies at home. They were all born at home with midwives. And I learned early on that Carl is an amazing doula. And for those of you that don't know, you've got a midwife that's basically there to make sure that everything's mechanically happening correctly. And then a doula will come in to support the mother. So the midwife is really there to support all things, but to make sure that the baby is okay. And then the doula is there to, again, help the mother with her comfort, just help her breathe. And it's interesting because we went to this birthing class together and we learned together, and we were both I was tapping into the masculine parts that I totally would not, usually the mechanics of things, the order of the birth, and all those things that just really wouldn't be something that I would find interesting, but I was invested because I was going to figure out how to birth and grow a baby within me, right? And then my husband was understanding and learning about the whole nurturing aspect of having a baby at home and celebrating that life and letting go of the masculine form of the hospital. I'm just going to say it. I'm going to say that that's a form of this order and patriarchy, right? So he naturally became my doula, not because I asked him to. He is very good at nurturing and and he's really tapped into this in our marriage as a father. And this is where it began, was when he just helped our children come into the world and helped me throughout the whole process and none of our births were very fast except for the twins. And I guess that's normal. But anyways, I love that there's that portion, right? I love that as we prepared for each of those babies to come into the world, he would say a prayer and he would invite our heavenly parents and the Savior to be there. And we specifically, as the births went on, we were more aware of inviting mother because we knew that we needed her there, right? And then I remember years later, he said to me, I really want to develop, I want to get to know my heavenly mother more. And he just started doing this stuff all on his own. And I just thought, that's so good. I mean, they need to go to it on their own, just like you and I need to go to the mother and the father and the Savior all on our own. And I just think, again, that is how we become this beautiful partnership, when we can see the masculine or feminine missing in our lives and we seek to have that balance and to shun I hate to say it, but I'm going to say shun those cultural traditions that aren't serving us and aren't helping us become whole. If we can do that, then I feel like we can truly, like you say, become our most authentic selves and just do the work necessary to become who we actually want to become.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think you're right. Thank you for reading that whole section on the patriarchy, because it does get a bad rap. And I don't necessarily want to point fingers at men in general, just like you said, but I think it needs to be discussed. And I think that we need to understand that, like you say, if I would have, I can say probably people listening right now had children during 2020 and they went to the hospital and their husbands couldn't be there because of COVID. And that is hard, because then we're taking away that opportunity for not only them to be part of this, bringing the children through the veil and experiencing this new life, but also tapping into that feminine, nurturing part of the birth that the dads and the husbands can partake of. And isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy that you lost that portion? You lost that portion of that opportunity during that time because of rules. And don't get me wrong, rules are great. Rules are great in many instances, but I think that it can be in some situations if we forget to allow the spirit and that feminine portion of us to guide us, we miss out on a whole, just so much growth, so much experience. I mean, those experiences together, having like partaking in that birth process together was like, I'll never forget it. And I'm sure everyone that's birthed children and been able to have their spouse or a mother or father like in the room with them, it's a very, very special experience.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah. Anyways, so many great things. Thank you so much for sharing so much of this beautiful book. If you guys don't mind, I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen, and I'm gonna show you some of the things that you should look out for that Kathryn has available. So let me move this over here. Okay, so again, these will be on the visual section, the visual versions of these on YouTube and Spotify. And okay, how do I do this? Okay, share. Okay, so what I'm showing you right now is actually Kathryn's book, The Mother Tree, on Amazon, and that's the place that you want to go to buy. I will have a link in the show notes that will take you directly there, and then you'll also notice that I'll also put a link for the tree at the center as well, and that's her collection of poetry that we talked about at the beginning. And then I want to show you her website, kathrynnightsonntag.com. And in that website, she has a beautiful page where she's collected all the interviews that she's done. You can tell there are quite a few here. Most of these are about the tree at the center, but you'll also start to keep track, and you'll start to see she'll be adding the new interviews about this latest book. And so you'll be able to come back anytime you want to add some new things to your study and your journey. You can come back and look at that. And then the last place I would invite you to follow Kathryn is on Instagram, and her new Instagram. What is it, about a year old? When did you start this one, Kathryn?
I don't remember. Probably about a year. Yeah,
Oh, I
probably
should
about a
scroll
year.
down.
Maybe a little longer.
About a year ago. Did you know, had you already talked to Bill when you started this?
No, I started this before.
Were you already in the process? No? Yeah. Okay. So, as you can see, there's, you guys, if you want to get to know Kathryn, you got to know a little bit about her and her connection with nature, but you can see it so prevalent throughout her Instagram. She's got beautiful quotes and resources for you, as well as imagery, and just, again, connections to nature and these ideas about the mother. Oh, look at that. There's my painting right there. Anyways, it's beautiful, but it's at our mother. So it's r.mother.tree. Okay. And again, I will have a link to this in the show notes, and then you can see Kathryn right there. So you know you're in the right place. But I just wanted to share those with you before we finish. Yeah. Kathryn, you're wonderful. I just want you to know how much I love and appreciate you and all the work that you've done. And I just want you to know that even though you know and you felt that light and that love, that I also testify that I know that our heavenly parents are so grateful for you and all the work that you've done, because truly you've been able to share this in a way that nobody else can share, and you do things that nobody else can do. And that's just the whole point of this journey, is to find the way that you can give your offering, and you've done that so beautifully. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That means so much to me. I
So
appreciate that so much. And I was so thrilled to finally meet you in person. That was so wonderful. And yeah, I hope I can move up there. One day I'll get up there.
I know. Just wait. We're gonna be neighbors someday, everyone. Just keep an eye out for that. Yeah. And it'll be a lot of fun. Maybe you'll get to see us on the same camera. That would be fun. That would be really fun. Um but yeah, just thank you again, and just we appreciate you and all you've done, and just know that you're loved from Kathryn and from me and your heavenly mother. Just know that your divine feminine and masculine love you very much, and that they are so happy to have you as children and to take this journey with you. And Kathryn and I are happy to take this journey with you. So much love from both of us. And have a wonderful week. And I'm going to play our let's see if I can play our jingle, and we'll close here. Maybe. I don't know if it's working. Can you hear it? I can't hear it. Okay. Well, just pretend that the end jingle is there. You guys are loved. Thank you so much. Love from Kathryn and I. Goodbye.